Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show on India's national television channel Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and India's core values and capabilities that are making the world a better place. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking a close look at the essence of India's successful democracy. India is the world's largest democracy and a role model for fellow developing countries in this aspect. What is the making of Indian democracy? How has it come about? And what are the underpinnings of this great experiment in human history? These are some of the themes we're taking up in the show. And to discuss this with me, I'm very privileged to introduce you to a very esteemed author and scholar who is teaching at the University of Sydney in Australia, Salvatore Babones. Professor Babones is the author of this new book, Democracy with Dharma, or the international edition is called Dharma Democracy, and which has just come out, and the subtitle is The Successful Indian Experiment. So we're going to be talking with him about this new book and the value addition it has brought to our understanding of Indian politics and of India's role in the world. Salvatore, welcome to Indian Diplomacy again.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
So, the running theme of this book, Dharma with Democracy, is that there is this core philosophical, spiritual concept that comes from the Hindu tradition, which is, dharma, or a sense of duty. And you especially highlighted Rashtra Dharma, or the duty towards the nation. Right. And you've said that that is the fundamental basis on which India's exceptional or extraordinary democracy has come about and has sustained across more than 7 decades now. It will be helpful for our audiences to know what you mean by this, because this is a bit of like a cultural argument, as opposed to simply saying that the founding fathers were very broad-minded and therefore India remained a democracy, or that that there is something exceptional with our institutions or with our population per se, but rather you are saying it has to do with dharma and with the flourishing of this idea and the upkeeping of dharma. So let's talk about what is the link between our political order as a democracy and this cultural/spiritual concept.
India's democratic institutions are very similar to democratic institutions in the rest of the world. They're very much built on a Western model. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who is the main drafter of the Indian Constitution, has his doctorate from Columbia University Law School in New York City. The institutions set up for Indian democracy are very similar to the institutions we find in the United States and in other Western countries. The difference for Indian democracy is in the electorate. India's electorate is much more traditional, much more religious, much more respectful than electorates in other democratic countries. India's electorate looks like the electorate in developing countries because India is, of course, a developing country, the only developing country that has built a successful democracy. So the real challenge for India becoming a democracy was not could it have good institutions. The whole world built democratic institutions. The question was, could it make those institutions succeed in such a traditional, religious, old-fashioned, conservative electorate? And that is why the book is called Dharma Democracy. That's where the idea of Dharma comes in. The Indian nation is built on a specifically Hindu conceptualization of the nation. And it's that conceptualization of India as a Hindu nation that has kept India together despite all the tribulations, whereas other countries that began as democracies, and Indians only have to look as far as the Pakistan and the division of Pakistan and Bangladesh to see that when a country does not have unity as a nation under a single unifying influence, that ultimately democracy does not function, because people don't feel they share a sense of nationhood. That's the real challenge of democracy in the developing world.
Right, and just to take this idea of unity forward, Salvatore, you've mentioned that, this fundamental unity of India as a civilization, civilizational nation, and all these concepts. We have also dissected the concept of civilizational state in this book. And so, we are all fond of saying that this is the most diverse country on earth. Language, religion, race, ethnicity, region. There's so many divisions, so-called divisions in this country, and yet there is underlying unity that has come about and has been preserved. So you have actually credited some important individuals and also socio-cultural movements, spiritual organizations, civil society groups, and said that they have sustained the idea of Indianness, which is then the basis for the democracy to have a rock solid foundation, right? So let's talk about these institutions and organizations which have maintained this Indian consciousness, in your opinion, which you've explained in the book, and how could they forge this shared sense of nationhood in spite of the so-called diversity of the divisions?
Democracies that fail don't fail due to some kind of slow descent into dictatorship. Democracies that fail because they split along ethnic or religious or regional lines. And that's been a story all across the developing world. When one side wins an election, the other side refuses to accept it. Now, that could have happened in India. India could very well have been a series of separate nations, an independent Bengal, an independent Maharashtra, an independent Tamil Nadu. All of that was possible. The fact is that India was unified as a nation by India's independence era leaders, primarily through the unity of Hindu civil society. Even if we think about Gandhiji, Gandhi was very committed to the idea of unity across religious boundaries in India's independence movement. He did everything possible to reach out to Muslim Indians and to convince Hindu Indians to consider Muslim Indians as their brothers. And yet, the Muslim Indians of the independence era, and I stress of the independence era, were adamant in wanting a separate state for Muslim Indians, with the result that we saw the creation of Pakistan. Yet, within the Hindu community, Gandhi was revered across lines of caste, across lines of geography, across lines of language. Nobody said, Gandhi is Gujarati, he's not our leader. Gandhi was a leader for all of India. And that wasn't just with Gandhi. It began certainly by the time of Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda played a very important role in unifying Hindu India. And again, just like Gandhi, he attempted to include Muslim India and Christian India in that broad definition of what India is. But who reveres Swami Vivekananda today? Hindus of all stripes, colors, languages revere Swami Vivekananda, but he hasn't broken out into the broader consciousness of Indians. That's why I say that India is empirically, and I'm not advocating this, I'm reflecting a reality, that India socially is a Hindu nation, even though India is civilly a political, secular democracy. Now, that's both been the strength that has kept India together, but it also has created the challenges that we see in India today of the social inclusion of non-Hindu Indians in the Indian nation.
Yeah, and let's also talk about some of the organizations you mentioned. Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, of course, these are all, great, long-lasting intellectual foundations of this idea of Indianness. But you've also, interestingly, spoken about the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS,
extensively,
the largest socio-cultural organization of the country. And you've also challenged many of the myths about the RSS and about the Bharatiya Janata Party, the ruling party of India since 2014, saying that, they actually have also helped to promote this, Rashtra Dharma, or the sense of duty to the nation and the national consciousness. And contrary to a lot of mistaken portrayals of them, they have not been actually in any way involved in creating some kind of a tyranny of the majority against the minority and so on. I know there have been lots of claims that minorities are facing persecution in India or that they have no freedom. But you've actually looked at the data and looked at the opinion polls and all that in a very, very detailed way and shown that that's not the case. So let's talk about the RSS and the BJP in particular, and how they have been, like you say, modernizing influences that have actually made India more unified.
I spent more research time and effort on researching the history and background of the RSS than any other factor in this book. It was a solid year of research on the RSS because it is so controversial, and I wanted to get the story right. Look, whether you agree or disagree with the RSS politics or the RSS philosophy, from a structural standpoint, the RSS was instrumental in knitting India together into a unified nation. Now, again, you don't have to agree with the philosophy of the RSS. The point is that when people asked, should a Tamil be an Indian or a Tamil? Should a Gujarati be an Indian or a Gujarati? That question was answered by the RSS very much in the sense that they should be Indians. And they spent a lot of time and effort in knitting a national community. So, for example, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, an RSS affiliate organization, the VHP, if you go to the World Hindu Congress, that World Hindu Congress is not a congress of any one particular Hindu tradition. It's a congress that people from all over India, from all languages, from all Hindu religious backgrounds, come together in a single civil society. And that's really what makes democracy operate. It's people believing that they're part of the same civil society and having those horizontal connections. Now, that's a standard theory of democracy. That's not my theory of democracy. Western political scientists, however, have typically looked for civil society outside the realm of religion, because historically in the West, civil society arose outside the Christian churches. And if you think about it for a minute, a Christian church is a vertically organized silo. If you're a Catholic, you cannot be a Lutheran. If you're a Lutheran, you cannot be an Anglican. These are each silos that separate and divide people. And thus in the West, democracy was only possible when people stepped outside the church and created a horizontal linkage across people of different Christian faiths. Now in India, on the other hand, there's no barrier to Hindus of one tradition connecting with Hindus of another tradition. You can be a Shiva devotee in the morning and go to the Ram temple in the afternoon, and there's absolutely no challenge in doing so. As a result, civil society in India was created within the Hindu fold. Now again, I want to stress, many efforts have been made historically and today to cut across and to be more inclusive and to bring non-Hindu Indians into civil society. I'm only speaking in an empirical sense. When I look at Indian civil society, it is strongly divided into a Hindu sphere and a separate Muslim sphere and a separate Christian sphere and a separate Sikh sphere. That's not a good thing. However, the fact is that Indian democracy has survived because 80% of India, or more than 80%, is included in a broad, interlocking civil society that when Indian democracy faced challenges, and it faced challenges under Nehru, and it faced challenges under Indira Gandhi, and it faced challenges after Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, and it faced challenges, there were multiple challenges to Indian democracy. Each time the nation held firm.
Yeah, it did not implode, and despite many doomsday predictions, and that of course is a core strength. Another major contribution of your book, Salvatore, is you have actually systematically and very rigorously deconstructed and critiqued all the international indices and rankings.
Yes.
Led by the VDEM project, the Varieties of Democracy project based in Sweden, which have been claiming that democracy in India is declining and that, freedom of expression is down, freedom of association is down, and so on and so forth. And you have actually showed that there are lots of subjective biases and even potentially, a kind of a vested interests who are running this agenda to try and, malign India's democracy. So let's talk about what these international indices get wrong about India. You've actually shown that they're not measuring Indian democracy and its sub-indices and its, all the components correctly. So what's wrong with these indices, and why should we be looking at them as problematic?
First, I'm going to surprise people. The democracy indices on which India scores the highest are those that are run entirely by Western organizations with no input from Indians. Okay, the Varieties of Democracy Institute and the Committee to Protect Journalists, and the Reporters Sans Frontières are two organizations that rate India the lowest. And they do so because those organizations ask their Indian affiliates to rate India. They ask their Iranian affiliates to rate Iran. They ask their, their Malaysian affiliates to rate Malaysia.
Experts
the country experts within the country rate the country. India suffers on these indices because India's own intellectual class rates India as a non-democracy with a lack of press freedom. However, Western experts who look in don't share that viewpoint. Not only that, when we look at objective criteria that we can actually quantify, India scores well within the range of established democracies, of countries in Western Europe and North America that we all accept are democracies. India's statistics, the actual quantifiable evidence, places India in the company of Canada, Australia. I'll leave the United States out, it's highly controversial. Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, Germany, France, and again, on a series of quantifiable indicators, I go to the data in the book and compare India to those countries and find that India compares very favorably. However, democracy rankings within India have become a source of political advantage. People who want to oppose the current government report that India is not a democracy under the current government, and then use the results of that survey to say, look, we told you so. Our viewpoint has been certified by the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Sweden or by Reporters Sans Frontières in Paris. That is, once you politicize an index, it's no longer useful as a measurement device. Now, every business person knows that. Once you set a target, it no longer becomes a good indicator. Well, the same exact thing is true for the democracy indices.
Yeah, and you have used a very interesting analogy of the comprador elite.
Yes.
Historically, these were the ones intermediating between...
Comprador is Portuguese for buyer.
Yeah.
It literally means, I don't speak Hindi, I need someone local to do my buying for me. A comprador, a buyer.
And you've likened some of these the Luthians or the establishment Indians as, colluding with the international,
I wouldn't say colluding, but I would say associating with. So who connects best with Western organizations? Obviously people with Western educations who speak English. Now, this idea of a comprador elite really is something I apply to India's independence movement. The national liberation movement was dominated by a comprador elite. Now, everyone knows that that's true for Gandhi was a London barrister, Nehru was a London barrister, Jinnah was a London barrister, but it's also true of people who on the other side of that movement. So Vinayak Savarkar would have been a London barrister, except because of his revolutionary activity, he was prevented from taking the exam. But he certainly knew British law. Contrast that with the national elite, that is, people who were born, raised, educated in India, who may have spoken English but were not experts at it. The most famous example here is, of course, Dr. Hedgewar and the initial leaders of the RSS. They were also elites, but they were not part of this comprador elite. They were a new elite developing in India. And we've seen since independence, the fundamental fault line in Indian society has been between this old Nehruvian elite, if you will, the comprador elite, and this new rising elite. No one would call the Ambanis and the Adanis and Narendra Modi and Amit Shah, no one would say they're not elite. Of course they're elite, but they come from a different elite that arose entirely within India, as opposed to an elite that looks to the rest of the world for its validation. Now, obviously, an elite that looks to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Oxford and Cambridge for its validation will be much more welcome in the West and much more reflected in international media coverage on India than people who have built their careers in India who speak English but maybe don't have the same cultural background as people in this internationalized elite.
So the ratings institutions are not asking the right kind of Indians, are not associating with the right kind of, or the ones who have a deeper understanding of the society, it seems. Last word, Salvatore, you've also talked about India as the Vishwaguru, as a, or a teacher to the world, and as a role model democracy for post-colonial, non-Western developing countries. And you've made a very strong argument that, the success of Indian democracy with, the mass participation, the trust in the institutions, the unity, all these, core factors, high level of competition, uncertainty of outcomes, turnover of power, all these things happening in India. You were saying that the Indian model, which is based on dharma or duties, may be more appealing to non-Western, traditional, and poorer countries than the classic Western liberal model. So, tell our audiences why you think India can be a template for the others to follow in the global South, and how can we export our model? I mean, generally we say we work with whoever is in power, and we don't try to impose our system on others. We are not hegemonic. It's not even part of Hindu values to proselytize others, right?
Yes.
So how do we do that export of our model?
Western countries have failed in democracy building in the developing world because they've tried to import or export Western institutions to those countries without exporting a Western electorate. So the electorate in a place like Nigeria, or indeed a place like Bangladesh or Pakistan, is never going to be like a Western electorate. Those electorates are much more similar to the Indian electorate. Now, they may not be Hindu, but there's nothing unique about Hindu people and Hindu faith that supports democracy. What Indian Hindus have done is established a sense of duty to the nation, duty to their democracy. They've built a democracy where even in a highly traditional, highly religious society, people can accept that we may disagree with each other, but our duty is to the nation. Now, that same narrative is something that can work in an Indonesia or in a Nigeria. These are all countries where people are very traditional and very religious. Take Bangladesh as an example. It's in the news right now. Do Bangladeshis feel a sense of duty to the nation of Bangladesh, or do they sense a duty to international Islamism? Or do they have a sense of duty to their party? Well, this is the challenge for Bangladesh, is inculcating a sense of shared Bangladeshi national identity and duty to the Bangladeshi nation, where if one party wins, the other party accepts that fact. Now, that's not happened in Bangladesh. Can this be exported to Bangladesh? It's difficult to say how, and I don't have the answer for that. My only answer is that it has to be done. That is, India's model of how people live together in a democracy is a model that should be an inspiration to other developing countries.
Right. Viewers, fascinating discussion with Salvatore Babones about his new book, Democracy with Dharma. I strongly recommend that you pick up a copy and read it because this show has only touched the surface. This is a major tour de force, kind of like an intellectual history of identity and politics in India, and also how it can impact the world at large. So do take a look at it. The essence of what we have discussed today is that warts and all, India remains a kind of a shining example of a successful democracy. And some of the biased reporting and coverage of Indian democracy from outside needs to be corrected, needs to be fixed. It's methodologically and fundamentally flawed. And more importantly, the faith that the people of India have in the democratic processes and democratic institutions remains high. And the participation, competition, all the major dimensions of democracy, India actually is doing very well, and we don't need to worry about Indian democracy. Rather, there are many other countries where democracy is in peril or in serious danger, including in our neighborhood. And if the Indian model can be somehow replicated or even studied or transposed as per their local cultural context, maybe the world will be fairer and just and more equal. So thank you, Salvatore, for being here and for speaking the truth about India from an outsider's perspective. It's much valued here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Viewers, Indian democracy is robust, and Indian democracy remains strong, and India is the mother of democracy in many ways. So do think about what we discussed today with Salvatore Babones, and read his book, and let's continue the discussion, and let's spread the positive message about the exceptional and extraordinary achievements of Indian democracy, because it's not possible for countries at this level of socio-economic development to have done what India has done. So it is a rare achievement and something that needs to be preserved. We are not flawless. We have also major problems in our democracy. But end of the day, relatively speaking, we have done well, and that's something to be cherished and something to be expanded and exported to the rest of the world. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.